Hey guys, it's Marie here again, and I'm making a quick card. I'm going to give you a look at these new papers from Canvas Corp brands. These are the Compose Your Life papers. They are by the artist Aga Baraniak. I don't know if I say her name right, but she's an amazing watercolor artist, and they took some of her watercolors and they added them to some Canvas Corp watercolor papers. So these are actually on watercolor paper and they're gorgeous. So I took this particular page that has all these watercolor florals and leaves, and I fussy cut a bunch of them out. So I'm going to be using that on my card today. So here's a look at the flowers that I went ahead and fussy cut. I've got some leaves, I've got some flowers, and a few buds. I just thought these were so gorgeous and I couldn't wait to layer them on my card. So I'm going to set these papers aside and then grab my card base. Now I'm using a Canvas Corp Brands craft cardstock. I created a base, and I'm also using some Canvas Corp Brands white cardstock. So on my white cardstock panel, I wanted to do a little bit of splattering, so I'm putting this laminated piece of cardstock behind it. It just makes it really easy to clean up after I do a little bit of splattering or painting or anything that gets a little bit messy. So I'm grabbing my Glimmer Mist, and this is just a light pink color. I just wanted to add just a tiny bit. So I took the nozzle out and I'm just splattering a little bit here and there on my card base. And since I'm using such a small amount, it's not going to take long to dry. I am going to use my heat tool, but it really doesn't warp my paper at all because I used just such a tiny amount. But it really does add a little bit of texture to the background of my card, especially when I'm leaving so much of the background white. Now I'm taking some Canvas Corp jute twine or jute cord, and I just wrapped it around into a circle to kind of make a rustic kind of frame to layer my pieces on. I also took a little bit of iCraft mixed media glue, and I spread it all over the twine, and it dries clear, but it made the twine a little bit more stiff so that I could just add it to my card and it would hold its shape. I'm also adding some Tombow liquid adhesive behind my twine so that I can put it where I want it to go on my card, and the liquid adhesive gives me a little bit of wiggle room to kind of move it around as I'm trying to stick it down. So once I was happy where my twine was, I grabbed my fussy cut pieces and just started to layer them on. So the leaves there are just glued down, and this flower I wanted to go over the twine. So I had to take into account that there are different heights on this card. So I needed my flower to adhere to the twine as well as to my card base. So I used some foam adhesive and some liquid glue so that the foam adhesive could kind of pop it up as it's adhered to the card base, and the glue can stick to the twine, and so it gives me a nice even, it makes the flower even though there's different heights behind it. And I just went ahead and I layered on my other pieces using that same technique of using adhesive, foam adhesive, and liquid glue. So now I'm just kind of tucking that last leaf down behind the twine and behind my other flowers, and I'm just using a little bit more foam adhesive. I'm putting some tiny pieces behind a few of these flowers and a few of these leaves just to kind of pop up the edges, so it kind of looks like it's kind of lifting off the page. So it's a really fun way to get a little bit more dimension and a little bit more interest in your cards. So I'm taking this little square of foam adhesive and I'm just sticking it behind this little bud here, just kind of making it look like it's lifting off the page a bit. And I just did that with a few of these pieces, a few of the flowers and a few of the leaves. Now I'm taking a little bit more of that twine and tying a bow, and I'm going to be adding it with some glue right there where I knotted it. So it kind of hides that knot and it gives you a little bit more pretty interest. I just love the rustic look of this twine. I think it gives a little bit more texture and it coordinates with the craft cardstock that I used as a base. So I'm just putting a little bit more liquid glue there and adding my bow, and I did set it aside and let it dry a little bit while I worked on my sentiment. So I'm using this Brutus Monroe stamp set. It's Birthday Bears, and I'm looking for a sentiment, and I chose that Make-A-Wish sentiment. I did use my embossing powder bag on this black cardstock before I stamped it so I could eliminate some static cling. I'm using my Versamark embossing ink along with this sentiment, and I'm just going to go stamp it on my black cardstock. Now I do like to kind of hold my stamp there for about a second so that I can let the ink really soak into the page and get a nice image. And then to emboss this sentiment, I'm going to grab my Brutus Monroe Alabaster White Embossing Powder. It's a super fine embossing powder. It has no wax fillers, so it really gives you a nice, smooth, embossed image when you use it. Just grabbing a dry brush to kind of brush off any of the extra powder that's hanging on there so I get a nice, clean, embossed sentiment. And I like to use coffee filters for putting the rest of my embossing powder back into the jar so I can use it again in the future. So I went ahead and I embossed the image or the sentiment, and I'm just going to kind of figure out where I want to put it. Now it was a little bit too wide, so I grabbed my trimmer and I just trimmed off a little bit. I was hoping it wouldn't move while I was trimming it, because when you're trying to trim these little pieces, sometimes they move on you, but this one did fine and I didn't have to redo it at all. And then I'm just going to trim down that banner on the side so I can kind of stick it between those flowers and over the twine. And I had to do that little, use some foam and some glue as well, again, to account for the different heights, and just adhered it down. So you could go ahead and leave the card as is. It looks pretty good, pretty finished right now, but I had to add a little bit of sparkle. So I took some glossy accents, and I have it in a little precision bottle, and I just squirted out a little tiny dot here and there where I wanted to put these tiny, tiny sequins from Nuvo. I think these are like their diamond sequins. They're kind of clear and very shimmery, and I love how tiny they are because you can add just a little bit of shimmery detail without it being too in your face or in the way. So I went ahead and I did that, and that pretty much finishes the card. I just set it aside and let it dry. But I hope you'll take a look at the rest of those papers and items from the Compose Your Life collection by Canvas Corp Brands, and hopefully it gives you some inspiration to create your own cards. So thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you next time. Bye.